Basically, I'm thinking about my first corner. I'm thinking about where I ought to brake, who's alongside me or who's behind me, and what sort of a heroic act they're going to take. It's generally an assessment of the activities to come. The minute board, I usually hit my stopwatch, and when it gets around to 30 seconds, I usually slip it into second to make sure I got no obstruction, because that's the next gear I need.
Over the years, we've done an awful lot of testing at Alton Park, but with our type of motoring, unless you're doing within 9/10 motoring all the time, which is usually under the lap record, and you have to do this sort of thing to find out what sort of a product you've built. This is probably the most hazardous part of the game. We usually test about 2-3 days a week, but average about 2 days over the year. Usually at the end of the season, you're usually developing something for the coming season. Especially in production stuff or saloon cars, you're usually aiming for what you're going to do next year, trying to develop some parts to get things homologated and stuff like that underway. So your intensive development is before the lousy weather closes in at the end of the season, and you get stuck into it then, October through to sort of end of November. You're usually looking for subtle things like improving your suspension settings and things like that, so your tyre pattern looks a little better, and a balance of roll bars between oversteer, understeer. The car by that stage is usually pretty well developed, so you're only looking for the subtle things, sort of half seconds and 0.2s instead of chasing hours. You can only do so much on a car, and you can only tick over your appraisal of the thing. So 2 to 3 mechanics and an efficient toolbox and the necessary spares which you've nutted out prior to leaving the workshop. You know the things you're going to evaluate in the day, be they for better or worse. So the job's pretty much sorted out in the workshop. It's only a matter of the application on the track.
Okay.
I usually like to wear one of the balaclava type of things with the Nomex material. A pretty sophisticated piece of equipment these days as far as fireproofing goes, especially as I don't get on with a all-enveloping bell helmet. And they fit in very nicely with these new double-layer fireproof overalls that they've spent all kinds of money to develop. And the whole lot's about as sophisticated as you can get in the fireproofing department these days.
Sever your rear roll bar, Frank, and up on the rebound settings.
Check the old brake cylinders off.
Yeah, they're fine.
Good. All right.
Okay.
Usually after some major adjustment, I sit back in the cockpit and try to compose myself. Get my thoughts together and see what sort of reaction I can expect from the modification we've just made. Do the normal sort of things like check my rear vision mirror down to the extent of looking at my shoes and make sure I've got the right ones on for the job. Like the ones with the asbestos soles, so I won't get my feet burnt off. And roll my face mask up over my face so I don't breathe in any of the nasties, and I'm off. Moving past the start, moving out to the left and starting your run in to find the apex for old hall. Moving straight across the road to the outside, third to fourth gear,
looking down the avenue for a very tight apex over the blind park, square the car up into the centre of the road for Cascades, which is a rather late apex, but you hang on and work the car to the outside of the road, because this gives you the straight line run down to really the second part of Cascades, which you start that corner with a change of surfaces early and working to the left and hanging onto the apex for quite a long time, 2/3 of the way across to square yourself up the brake in a straight line for Esso, which is into second gear through Esso, holding the very tight line at the last part, power full on, car working its way across to the outside, tucking nicely over the middle of the road. It's important you leave there with a maximum amount of revs down the main back straight. Get you down to Knickerbrook, which is to the left of the road, a break at the 100-yard board, in tight to the right-hand side to look for the concreted apex and out for the hard shoulder on the left. Working yourself straight across, up through the woodlands and heading yourself up into Druids. Druids is a 2 apex, 1 sweep. Has to be done very tidy, finding the inside of the road once again and across to an adverse apex on the left-hand side of the road, which you have to keep the weight off the car, and in a straight line, slightly 2/3 to the left-hand side of the road to find yourself at Lodge Corner. You then leave Lodge, through the gearbox, down through the middle of the road, down the old pit straight. Once again, you're starting off on your start-finish lap. I originally desperately wanted to be a professional golfer, but due to finance and stuff like that, and I'd had money spent on me going through technical college, and I wasn't disinterested in engineering at all. I had my definite ideas on what I would like to do, you know, and it certainly wasn't shut myself in 4 walls and gaze at a slide rule all day and be the buffing type of individual, which I think I'm not this sort of executive equipment anyway to cope with this type of life. I think at the time I was sort of scratching around and there was speedway racing and things like this around, and you were taking a couple of jobs on to buy various things, and it all gives you a taste for it. It gives you a taste of, I suppose, a little bit of achievement, and you don't like to back away from it. You find yourself enjoying the thing. But I don't think initially, and I can't think back that far, as I've got a lousy, retentive mind anyway. You just go from one thing to the other, and somebody says, would you like to do this? And you find that you're not outstanding equipment, but through a bit of vanity you persevere with it to make yourself a little better, and you sort of take it from there, and you get a taste of these things. And I suppose, like a lot of other people, it's nice to be some form of identity instead of going through life and, you know, somebody holding letters out for you to lick with your tongue.
I suppose when I was a boy and wanted to go motor racing, you paid your money and you took your chances and stuff like that. These days they've got racing drivers' schools, which I think are fantastic from that point of view. You go to a driving school and you do the course, and having got yourself through the course, it gives you a little bit of thinking time, and it hasn't cost you any more than it really than if you were going to learn to fly a tiger moth. But if you make a wrong decision, not like a painter, you can walk back and look at it, but in a racing car it usually is of dire consequences. You know, you've made the decision and there's the accident. And you'd love to go back on it. You'd pay £1 million to go back and have another shot at that mistake, but there's no way. And you, if you're lucky, you climb out of the wreckage. If you're unlucky, you know, you're horizontal. So you can't emphasise the safety on young people coming into it to get through and get conditioned reflexed and to get a little bit of professional thinking, like having regard for the sea bloke. Never stop having regard for racing cars and tracks, because they're nasty old things. They'll turn around and bite you the moment you slack up on them. You can visualise the bone-shattering ride that a thing like this gives. You know, it shakes all the buttons off your overalls. I suppose that's why they invented zippers. The thing is really a diabolical thing to sit in, so it's very hard to get the balance of it. You have to manhandle them a bit, but your lighter cars, your more subtle cars, the steering wheel's more or less an encumbrance. You know, you sit in the car and balance the whole thing with your backside. You get your feet braced on the bulkhead and you just very carefully hold the steering wheel, but you're not really conscious of the steering wheel all that much as conscious as to what the movement of the car is going to do. But a thing like the Chevy, with its compromises in its steering, it's very hard to balance it in the wet, and this is where the little cars have got an advantage on you. It's a soul-destroying thing because you can never quite get the thing flowing the way you want it, and you can never explain this to people. You must really do the slide before it happens. As you know, my style of driving, I very rarely got attitude on a motor car. I try and keep the thing going as a movement. You know, I might be working overtime in the cockpit, you know, going 300 to 1, but basically what I'm trying to do is to avoid any form of attitude getting on the motor car, which looks all pretty crowd entertaining, but in a big car is a terrible waste of time. Experience is a great teacher, and over the years you know all the tracks, you've done them all before. Occasionally a strange one crops up, a haybird one.
Usually probably the best way if you arrive at a place and you usually get there in time just before the evening meal, but if you can wander out to the place and at least walk around it and get some idea of the length of the place if there's been no maps available, get some idea of your gear ratios and the road surface, whether it's under trees, what sort of a problem it's going to present in the wet. A walk and a bit of a think about it usually sorts it out. To my mind, anyway, everybody's different about these things, but it's not a bad one to start with.
Frank, how much, in your opinion, is physical fitness important for a racing driver?
I don't think anybody should be around the Cassius Clay proportions where they'd sooner have a fight than a feed. But I think within the realms of the time available with travel and everything like that, it is important that somebody settles down to a routine of exercise within his capabilities and looks after himself and doesn't wind up giving the wife a cuddle every night of the week prior to the race anyway, at least.
Frank, what factors have to be taken into account in selecting the right tyre for the job?
Well, obviously it depends on the conditions. Are pretty elastic. In a place like Thruxton, with its quick changes of direction, we were there a few weeks back, and you would really like to run your softest compound because the weather at this particular occasion was slightly overcast. So you're trying to get down to a soft compound, and you know in the back of your mind if it dries out, the soft compound won't do the job. But if it stays the way it is, slightly damp, you can't afford to be without the soft compound, competition being what it is these days. And of course you're obviously in trouble with chunking because the heavier the car, the harder the compound, and the less adhesion you get through it, and you have to generate an awful lot of heat, which is exactly what happened to us at Thruxton. We just under-compounded and the tyres all chunked away, and you wind up on the canvas, and by the grace of God, the opposition fading away, you're able to get the thing home in one piece. But it was really a bad piece of judgment trying to take the easy way out.
We'll balance them in between practice and race if you've got it later. Yeah. At least it's opened up the drains and things.
When practice started, it was raining and everything was saturated, so we bolted on the tyres that should have taken care of the conditions. Brian Muir, who I regard as my main rival, was doing a far better time than I was, and I was really getting nowhere at this stage. Well, at this rate I was going to be way back on the grid. I certainly wasn't coming into the line time-wise, but fortunately the track was drying out and the deep puddles that you aquaplane on were disappearing, so I decided to bolt on a soft compound slick and see whether I could close the times up this way. Due to the elements and having a bit of an educated guess at it, they worked out a lot better. And I was pretty soon able to close the gap and work my way up onto the front row of the grid. I missed out on pole position, but fortunately the middle of the grid, which suits my car and my particular outlook on Thruxton a lot better. And I was doing a lot better than my mini-mate.
Frank, Thruxton on a deal like this, what's this track like in the wet?
It's not too bad. It's like all these tracks that are used every so often. The drainage isn't that clever and you're apt to be caught out. on water build-up on some of the curbings. You're always constantly looking for the change in line, which is applicable to most tracks anyway, but it's a little more so here. And the other major problem you run into, if anybody goes off up around the very fast back section of the circuit, they incline to shower mud and grass across the track, which is a pretty good combination for a high-speed shunt. So you really are working overtime with the eyesight, trying to pick up this change in condition all the time.
Yeah. And the Camaro, all this power on a wet road?
Well, you usually got about an inch of throttle pedal you don't know what to do with. You wish somebody would take some cylinders away sometimes, but all in all, it's not too bad. It's the same for everybody. It's a motor race, and you just got to get on and do the job. Conditions hadn't altered that much since the finish of practice till the start of the race, so rightly or wrongly, I decided to stick with the soft compound slicks that I'd had on for the final practice. The sky was still pretty overcast and could have gone anyway. There was a high wind drying the track out all the time, but it could have closed down at any time, and I would have had the right tyres to do the job at the time. I was now in the middle of the grid, with Brian Muir on my right and Dave Matthews on my left. It gives you a nice view of the corner, and it's about the best starting surface that you can ask for of a lot of tracks. Brian Muir, being a bit of a charger, arrived at Allard first, tucked nicely into Campbell and the Seagrave complex, and got through that lot all right. No particular adventures. The only thing that came to mind immediately was I had a very nasty oil smell. The big trick to actually get yourself onto the straight is to hang back just a little bit and get a run on a slightly slower car, and Brian had certainly had less power than I had, so as soon as I hit the back straight, having hung back a little bit and got the swing at the corner, I think annihilation was the order of the day down the back straight. Try and do a late apex into Campbell and then keep the car in the centre of the road for another late apex at Cobb. The reason for these late apexes, once again, is you can never see the exit of these corners. From Church, it's flat out all the way to the chicane, the fastest part of the course, where the Chevy would reach approximately, according to our gear and calculations, about 148 mile an hour. Around about the third lap, I decided that the nasty old oil smell I had at the start was certainly a lot more serious than just an oil leak, as it was now accompanied with a vibration in the gearbox area. And your mind ticks over, you don't quite know how to cope with this one for a few feet. But the basic thing was the car still felt reasonably sound, so I decided to press on and consolidate my lead, so I could have a little bit of time to think about this thing and work out some sort of a permutation how to get this motor car home.
The best laid plans go astray when you find yourself with say a faulty transmission or one gear missing about. At what stage do you try and get the thing home, or attempt to hold your lead, or does second look better than a possible retirement? There's a million things attached to it, and you can never say that I have gone out with a set plan, because it can alter from the first corner onwards, where you can get a ding in a wheel and you know you've got a suspect tyre and stuff like that, and you're easing the car around on left-handers because you know all is not well. You've got some type of vibration, and whether you fractured a half shaft, a wheel bearing or what, you know, you've still got 50, 60 mile to run. The next big trick is to assess exactly what's going on around you as to how you can nurse it home. And is it all that serious, and can you hang on to your lead? Or what is the strength of the opposition? But if you've got somebody breathing down your ear hole all the time, you can't afford to be mechanically sympathetic if you're going to retain your lead. So you usually wilt under the strain and settle for what is the most common sense thing to do on that day. If you've made a bad start or if you're having a hard race, you may study the situation for 5 or 6 laps, because it's no good passing somebody to be retaken again. That's just love's labour lost in a big way. And to follow somebody sometimes is not a bad thing because he's blazing away through traffic. It can have its hazards as well, of course. Driving with inexperienced people, they think once one car's got by them, that's the end of that, and they'll quickly nip in behind to get a tow, and of course you wind up hitting them straight up the exhaust pipe. If you're in the front, you've got a clear track, you're braking in your own time, you're doing your own thinking. Apart from watching the car behind you, you've certainly eliminated the one in front of you. So it is a process of elimination of things to do. It's 7 litres of engine, which says it's got loads of torque. It hasn't got a great deal of horsepower. It gives 550, which is about the best I've ever seen out of it on the brake. It's good for around about its 175, 180. It's a very heavy car. It's a couple of tonne of motor car. And the only time that these sort of speeds are brought home to you with a wham is when the thing doesn't start to decelerate when you jump on the brakes, because it's got such a charge up like an express train, it doesn't want to know about stopping. Then you put your tongue in your cheek occasionally, have a few quick breaths and a couple of Hail Marys, depending on your religion.
Which is probably just what Terry Sanger said as he tried to correct a Chevy. Really is a big motor car. He probably said, bugger it, he's got his beard caught in the steering wheel. Fortunately for some and unfortunately for me, the weather hadn't gone as the educated guess would hope that it moved. It was drying out, and I certainly was going to be in for a tyre problem as I'd plumbed for the soft compound, and it was quite obvious that I'd made the wrong guess at that lot. You've got to stick your neck out a little bit, but you try and calculate it as much as humanly possible when it comes to overtaking slower cars or slipstreaming another car. And at the same time, on a hot day, you move back a little further than you normally would on a cold day, because you're starting to shift your radiator temperatures and oil temperatures, because being stuck in a slipstream all the time gives very little cooling properties to your car. I suppose you're a bit isolated while the race is on. It's not really a game of sorries, and at the same time it's not a game of jeopardising. At no time are the stakes that high that you're going to jeopardise your own safety and somebody else's safety, unless you are completely stupid about the whole thing. And stupidity comes with lack of experience, failure to have some time in hospital and have a nurse hold your hand and stuff like that. If anybody knows consequences of some sort of foolhardy action, well, certainly they have second thoughts about it before committing it. There's a world of difference between open wheelers and saloons. Apart from 4 wheels and a steering wheel, there's really not any comparison between the two motor cars. Your open wheeler car is a nicely engineered piece of equipment. It's made around you, for you, and you fitted yourself into it, and it's a very precise piece of equipment. It does what you want it to do when you finish fiddling with it, of course. But it stops enormously quickly. It goes around corners. You trim it out with wings. It's generally the end product of a load of development that's gone into racing cars over the years, and they're a very responsive thing to drive, whereas your saloon is not responsive in any way, shape or form. You sort of hang on to it and hope and try and pick the balance of it up in between bumps. The thing waddles around the circuit and runs out of brakes on you occasionally because it's too heavy and too under-braked, and there's only a compromise you can do with the suspension because the regulations govern this. They're a lot of fun, and as far as an engineering achievement goes, there's no comparison between the two cars either. Towards the end of the race, I was still leading, but in all sorts of trouble. Tyres had almost chunked away. I could only get one gear. I was virtually stuck in top all the time. Occasionally I could get snatches of the other gear, but basically it was better to stay in top. The opposition, Brian Muir, wasn't able to do anything about this, thank goodness, judging by the clouds of steam coming out of his car. David Matthews was also having some type of strife as Brian was suffering. So they really weren't able to do too much about my number one spot.
So to have achieved something, you obviously feel great about it, as long as you don't go around and shoving it down everybody's throat and reliving the whole thing, because it's then over, isn't it? And the thing that's important is, what are you going to do? Your maintenance on your car, and get the whole thing shipped out, get your mechanics organised, and next week then becomes important. It's not that blasé because it's terribly enjoyable, but it has to be in that order.
Thank you very much.
Hey, still rolling, huh?
Good help.
This was one of my lucky days. I had to be bloody lucky to finish with a tyre like that, having made the wrong decision on compound, which was all my own work. And the gearbox finished in 2 pieces, so you're better to be lucky than rich some days.
Well,
Cool as a cucumber, but I had the oil length from about the 3rd lap coming into the cockpit.
Yeah. I didn't think they noticed what had happened to you, because he didn't really make any effort to go after you.
Yeah.
So,
And yet the times weren't all that good. They were hanging around 26 as a lot.
That's right.
But then we got the lap record at what?
23 there.
Did we?
Yeah, it's 1.4 off it.
Yeah, that was all too much. I didn't mean to take such a slice off it, but I didn't know whether he was determined or what, so I thought I'd just get rid of him and then have a think. Because the moment I started to smell oil on the first lap of the vibration, I thought, well, I'll get rid of you and give myself some thinking time to get the thing home. Anyway, that's the way it goes.
Frank, all the circuits you race on during the year, which one do you like the best?
I haven't really got any favourites. I suppose the one where the sun's shining and the last one I won on, really. That's just about it. You know, I don't have any sort of superstitions or colours or numbers. You know, I won't walk under black cats, but, you know, that's about it.